Scott and Stiles look for information to help against Deucalian and the Alpha Pack. In flashbacks, a young Gerard Hale tries to navigate werewolves, hunters, and young love, and we finally learn why werewolves' eyes are different colors. Hello, entertainment enthusiasts. This is Ray, and this is the Fandom Realm. And today I am recapping and reviewing my number 3 Teen Wolf episode, and that is called Visionary. It is episode 8 of season number 3. As always, spoilers are included, so just be aware. Now, as I've been doing for the other top 10 countdown episodes, I'm going to list points and go through so that you can do the same thing that you've been able to do in the previous episodes. We only have a few episodes left, of course. Number 2 and number 1, which will be coming out next week. And so with that, number 3 is Visionary. And to start off, Visionary, this is going to be a mostly flashback episode. And we're actually going to get started with this episode as we see a young 15-year-old Gerard Hale running for his life through the woods in Beacon Hills. He's going to fall down a cliff, and he's actually going to run into another werewolf. And that werewolf identifies him as Gerard Hale. Well, they're all running from the hunters, led by Gerard and Chris Argent. And the werewolf is actually going to get shot almost through the throat. It's not exactly through the throat. It's like upper chest by an arrow. And Derek just sort of stands there shocked. And they take another shot with an arrow at him. And he's going to be saved by Peter Hale. Peter, who looks a little older than Derek at this point, probably supposedly, I'm just going to guess, around his maybe 19, 20, 21, somewhere in that area. He's definitely not at school at the time. And so he saves Derek's life, and they run off, and they're going to hide in basically a underground, almost like a root cellar, and it's hidden because it's dark and the hunters can't see it, and there's actually an old tree growing up out of the root cellar, and that is the Nemeton, and Chris is going to identify that a little later on in the actual episode. Now, the flashback is going to actually carry us back to modern day, where we're going to get to see Cora and Stiles and Peter. They are all looking like they are at Derek's loft, and Cora was basically telling the story that Peter and Derek hid for 2 days. That's what they're supposed to do when they're being hunted, is hide and heal and wait until they can get out of it. And the big question that's going to arise here is, how did Derek become the Derek we know today? And with that, Peter's going to walk down the steps, and he's going to basically tell Cora and Stiles that Derek was a whole lot like Scott. He's going to tell Cora and Stiles that Derek was a lot like Scott when he was Scott's age. And so it comes down as well to the fact that his eyes changed, and what changed those, we don't find out yet, but we do know it was something to do with a girl that he fell in love with. Now, I'm going to use all that for point number 1, and I'm going to tell you, I just love this opening of this episode. The cold opens for Teen Wolf are so awesome, and with that, just the introduction here of the new young Derek. I loved Ian Nelson here. Never heard of him until this. I've seen him in a couple things since, and he's a musician as well. But with that, I thought he played the part of a young Derek to the T. And also the actor that played the older or the younger Peter was just creepy enough that he really seemed like he could be Peter. And so with that, the scene also gave you enough information to make you wonder, what in the world's going on? Why are the Argents here hunting in Beacon Hills? What's going on? And so a lot of good questions to be answered throughout the rest of this episode. Now, we're going to move on to point 2 here, and we're going to see that Allison has taken Scott to meet with Gerard. At this point, I'm not sure Scott knew that he was still alive, but he's actually in some type of nursing home type area where he's being cared for. He has basically tested negative for cancer, but now he's got this black goo coming out of him because of the bite. And so with that, he's actually wanting Scott's help to take away some of the pain, and Scott does offer to do that if they can give him some information about Deucalian. Now, with that, I'm going to add this to number 2 as well, because that's basically where the episode is going to start. We're going to have a cello playing, and it's going to be revealed a girl is playing that cello, and she's having trouble playing because some jerks are out in the hallway playing basketball. And she goes out, she asks them to stop, and of course, one of those is young Derek Hale. He and his fellow basketball players are being a little bit crummy at the moment, and she stands up to him. She is not going to back down from him, and I think that's supposed to be a very big thing because he becomes intrigued with her, and Derek actually comes into the music room to talk to her. He's wanting her name, and she tells him that if he can play any instrument in the entire music room, she will tell him her name. So he wanders around and wanders around and wanders around, and finally comes up with a triangle, and he plays it, and she's going to give him her name, which is Paige. And a funny thing was with their interaction as well is that she, of course, already knew his name. I would say Derek was probably pretty popular around the school, so probably everybody knew Derek. Now, I've added that into number 2, so we actually jump back and we get to see Gerard, Scott, and Allison, and they are talking about Deucalian, and we're actually in a situation there where Gerard is going to try to raise some suspicion about Deaton. The fact that the third healer was found dead right after Deaton was rescued, and sort of brings up the topic of what all is going on there. And Gerard hints that Deaton could be behind the Durock's killing spree, and he suggests that Deaton could have staged the kidnapping, knowing that he would survive and the third victim was strung up already. Of course, Scott doesn't really buy this. He protests. He believes Deaton would never do that. Gerard tells him that he would be surprised how far someone would go to get rid of someone like Deucalian. And along with that, Scott's going to become very impatient with him and demands that he tell them how to beat Deucalian. But the bad thing is, Gerard's going to tell them that you can't beat Deucalian. He's tried. And with that, they're going to threaten to leave. Allison and Scott is. And then Gerard is going to offer up some cryptic advice. And he tells them that Deucalian has lost his eyes, but he is not always blind. And so that's going to be a very important saying, especially when we get to the final of the season. But just a couple things on what happened in number 2 here is I'm very interested to see sort of what happened with Gerard here, and the fact that he, after season 2, when he was dying of cancer and he wanted basically to get the bite and everything that was going on, he is still alive. You know, I think a lot of people thought after that second season that they would have killed him. So that he's still around is very important. He's a very good bad guy. And so with that, he also is going to be one of our main narrators for this episode. Now, the other part of that is the introduction of young Paige and Derek. And I've already mentioned young Derek. I liked the portrayal of this Paige. She's strong, she's independent, and she's not afraid of Derek. She's not intimidated by Derek. And I thought that was something that was very important, although he had all his friends out there supporting him when he was trying to keep the basketball away from her. She basically went and did her best, and then she just decided to go back and play her cello. And then we went on from there. All right, moving on to number 3, we're back to Stiles, Cora, and Peter. And actually, Stiles is sort of jabbering on, trying to figure out how old Peter is, how old Derek is, how old Cora is, and he's not really sort of understanding their age. But basically, that's going to get us into a situation where Stiles is going to realize he's probably not getting any kind of satisfaction on the question, and he drops it. Peter is going to then continue his story of Derek's whirlwind teenage romance with Paige. Derek had a favorite getaway, an abandoned distillery outside of Beacon Hills. While Peter claims Derek told him all this because Peter was his nephew's closest friend, we see that he is lying to Stiles. Peter actually was spying on Derek and Paige as they made out in the distillery. The couple's encounter is cut short, however, when Derek smells blood and hears people approaching. The couple leave the distillery, but Peter remains behind and watches as Enis, Collie, and Deucalian arrive with their full packs. Enis is angry. He points to a frayed rope hanging from the ceiling and indicates that it was in that spot that the Argents killed one of his betas. Collie wants to know why she should care about another's pack, and one of her betas speaks up and says that the Argents don't discern between packs when they come after werewolves. Deucalian points out that the hunters do discern motive, and one of Deucalian's betas, Marco, says that Enis's dead beta was young and naive and killed one of the hunters, and Enis does admit that it happened and it was an accident. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cut this scene actually up into two, so let me discuss number 3 first. And biggest two things probably for me out of this was the idea that we are shown early on that Peter is flat out lying about some of the things that happened. While he tells Stiles that he was Derek's best friend and Derek had told him about all this, and we see though that he was actually following Derek and spying. And so we know this is not going to be a very accurate story on his part. And then I love this seeing that basically all the Alpha Pack members except for the twins had been here in Beacon Hills before, and they seem to be very different type of packs at that point in time, and not really what I was imagining when they first introduced the alphas of the Alpha Pack. Now, moving on to number 4, and this is actually still in the same scene, and so what's gonna end up happening here is we're gonna move to Gerard, Scott, and Allison again, and he basically is picking up the story of what was going on at the distillery that night. So basically, he's going to explain to Scott and Allison that each member of the current Alpha Pack had gathered in Beacon Hills with their packs to seek guidance from the Alpha Talia Hale. Of course, that is Derek's mother. She was well known. She was widely respected in the werewolf community, and part of that was because she had the rare ability to fully shapeshift into a full wolf. Talia explains to Deucalian that vendetta is Enis's right, and they are not the only people to adhere to rituals thousands of years old. Deucalian says that's no excuse for not evolving. Enis has grown tired of the useless debate. He yells that the hunters ripped out his beta's claws one by one when they tortured him. Deucalian cautions that a battle between two such powers will never end if Enis pursues vendetta against the Argents. Enis doesn't really care. He uses his claws to make an enormous spiral, slicing it into the wall of the corrugated metal, making it heat up and spark and glow. So I'm going to stop with 4 right there. And with that, basically, I love that we got Talia Hale here. I was very much hoping that we would get some of the Hale family. Of course, we'd gotten Cora. I was hoping we would get more. This was a nice surprise. I didn't know that she was necessarily someone that could turn into a wolf, although I probably should have after early in season 1 when they found Laura Hale's body, at least half of her body as a wolf. And so it would have made sense that something like that might run in the family. But knowing that Talia Hale was sort of a mentor and leader of the packs, I really was glad we got that information, and just seeing how angry Enis was because of what happened and this whole idea of his pack and losing a member and how painful that was and that he needed revenge on the Argents. I really enjoyed all that from this part of that episode. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we're still basically in the same story as we move back to Derek's loft, and Peter is going to draw a similar spiral with his finger in the condensation on the window and explains to Stiles that it's their symbol for vendetta. Of course, they had seen this before because of Peter's killing spree in season 1. When Stiles says that werewolves take the idea of revenge to a whole different level, Cora's going to ring in and say that it's not just about revenge, that losing a member of the pack is more painful than losing a member of your family. It's more like losing a limb. Peter then tells how Beacon Hill's authorities wouldn't let Enis see the body of his dead beta. And with that, we get to see in the hospital, Deputy Stilenski is going to be coming into the emergency room. Enis is causing all kinds of trouble, and he's going to try to calm Enis down, explaining that they're investigating this death as a homicide, and that no matter how close Enis was to the deceased, they were not family. Of course, Enis is angry, and he tells Stilenski that he was family to me. Peter tells the group that he looked at Enis's situation and saw profound loss, but Derek saw opportunity to always be with Paige. This, of course, is a lie. The truth was the opposite. Okay, so for number 5, basically, the big thing here is just getting to see Sheriff Stilenski as a deputy and trying to calm down Enis, and this whole idea of how important revenge is to werewolves, and this idea of the pack mentality I thought was very important. Now, moving on to number 6, and this is still basically in our same story time period. We're still going to be with the group in Derek's loft, but in the past, young Derek sits in class using his heightened senses to listen to Paige play on her cello. He makes his way to the music classroom and tries to distract her because she says she has laser-like focus, and he's going to basically kiss her ear, breathe into her ear, everything he can do to try to make her lose focus. Eventually, she's going to stop playing, and they're going to declare their love for each other and kiss. Peter then claims that Derek lived in constant fear that Paige would find out he was a werewolf, but we see in the past that this is another lie. It was Peter who went to great lengths to convince Derek that if Paige found out, it would end their relationship. And Derek's also going to tell Peter that he needs to leave him alone, that he can get him banned from the school property. And so we're seeing this relationship between the two develop. Peter's then going to tell Derek that he and Paige are perfect for each other. He says perfect combinations are rare. Peter then goes on to plant the seed that Derek should turn Paige into a werewolf so she won't ever leave him. Peter continues to lie to Stiles and Cora, claiming that he tried to talk Derek out of turning Paige, even though we see in the past Peter telling Derek to have one of the alphas in town bite and turn Paige, and that's going to end this point. So now just a couple things on this entire point. And again, the big thing here is really this idea of Peter is manipulating the story, because everything he is saying happened actually was from his point of view and what he said, not what Derek was actually saying. He was the one that was putting all these thoughts in Derek's head, and none of it actually came to Derek himself. Also with that, another big thing that just stands out is while these two had a relationship, and Peter earlier called them being best friends, you can sort of see they really weren't best friends. It was more like an uncle-nephew relationship almost, or at least that's sort of the feeling I get, especially when Derek is uncomfortable with what Peter is saying, especially about trying to get Paige to be turned, and when he tells him that it'll get him banned off of the campus. Those aren't really some things that best friends normally do. And so I thought that was very interesting how that was being handled in this episode. Now on to point number 7. We're actually going to get to see that root cellar area, basement area where the Nemeton was. Gerard and Chris Argent are examining the area. It's where they think Peter and Derek Hale hid from the hunters. They do notice the large tree growing out of the foundation and the 5-fold Druid druid knot that is carved into the bark of the tree, and Chris identifies it as a druid symbol, and that the blood on the trunk of the tree indicates some sort of sacrifice took place there. He says the basement is a Nemeton, a sacred space for ancient druids. According to Chris, druids picked a large older tree in the grove to represent the center of the world, and then believed that by cutting it or harming it, the tree would bring severe issues to the surrounding areas. Now, I'm going to combine this because we're also getting conversation between Allison, Scott, and Gerard about the druids, and Allison is wondering why her father knows so much about them, and Gerard says that you need to know your enemy, and he basically goes on to describe the relationship between the ancient werewolves and the druids, and that those druids were basically called emissaries, basically advisors to the packs. He then recounts the tale of Lycaon, an ancient Greek, which according to myth, some Greeks believe they owed their lives more to Prometheus than to the gods of Olympus. Some followers even took names to honor the Titans instead of the gods. One of those names would have been Deucalian, who is named after the son of Prometheus. Lycaon didn't just refuse to honor the gods, he actually challenged them. He invited Zeus to a banquet where he tried to serve him the flesh of a human being. Angered, Zeus blew the place apart with his lightning bolts and turned Lycaon and his sons into wolves. So Lycaon actually is going to search out the druids to help him turn back into human. The belief was that the ancient druids knew how to shapeshift. They couldn't make Lycaon and his sons human again, but they did teach them how to shift back and forth. And so the druids became important advisors to the packs. We're going to continue on this entire point because we're also getting to see Stiles, Cora, and Peter talk about the druids. Cora picks up the story explaining that the druid emissaries keep the werewolves connected to humanity, but are kept a secret even within the pack. Sometimes only the alpha knows their identity. Peter then tells the startled Stiles that Mrs. Morell is emissary to the alpha pack. Of course, she is Deaton's sister. Stiles wants to know why the werewolves never tell him important things like that, and he's just a little upset because he had given some personal information and gotten back good advice, which Cora does point out is what the emissaries do. Now, just a few things on this, and I loved every second of this backstory of werewolves and Lycaon, and I think actually this does at least partially line up with some of the ancient myths on werewolves, but especially the part about Lycaon and Zeus and all that. But then I also know that they did make up the whole part about the druids being sought out to help Lycaon and his sons and being able to turn the wolves back, or at least allow them to turn back and forth. I know that, I believe, was something that was just made up for Teen Wolf, but I loved it and it made plenty of sense, and I always love to see stories this deep in. I mean, we're 3 seasons into Teen Wolf and we're still building that Teen Wolf background and world, and so I really enjoyed that in this episode, and I thought this episode was very important because of that. Also, the idea that we have Chris and Gerard having found the Nemeton, and of course Chris knowing what it was very important. I will tell you this though, I was a little confused when I first saw this episode, and still even watching it, I'm a little confused about the blood on the tree. My assumption was when they found it that that was Paige's blood, where Derek had sacrificed and taken her life after she got bit and wasn't turning. But where they actually found the blood and the tree and the cellar don't really put that together. And, you know, Peter and Derek were not hurt and bleeding when they hid in the cellar earlier in the episode. So that is one point that was a little confusing to me. And, you know, I just drop it. But, you know, I guess a druid could have been there and done a sacrifice. Now, moving on to number 8. Deaton is in conference with Talia and Deucalian at the animal clinic, and Deucalian is wanting to approach Gerard about a truce and try to get some type of peace between the Argents and the Packs. Talia says that Gerard might be the wrong one to approach. Deaton actually thinks she said this because the Argents have a matriarchal leadership structure, but Talia says Gerard is wrong because he's a complete psychopath. I love that line. Who cuts people in half with a broadsword? Deucalian is surprised that Deaton and Talia have so little faith in people, and he expresses his thought that Gerard would be worried about deaths on his own side as well. And this is when Deaton gets to use his good old story that we probably all heard at one point or another in different situations. But of course, that's the story of the scorpion and the frog, where the scorpion and the frog meet on the bank of a stream, and the scorpion asks the frog to carry him across on its back. The frog asks, "How do I know you won't sting me?" The scorpion says, "Because if I do, I will die too." The frog is satisfied and they set out, but midstream, the scorpion stings the frog. The frog feels the onset of paralysis and starts to sink, knowing they both will drown, but has enough time to ask why. And the scorpion responds, "It's in my nature." The story is to point out to Deucalian that his faith in humanity won't matter if he underestimates Gerard's nature. Talia then advises Deucalian not to meet Gerard unless they're on neutral ground and not to walk alone. And of course, Deucalian says he's an alpha and he never walks alone. Now, going back and looking at this just real quick, I love this story of the scorpion and the frog, and a similar story is going to come up in just a couple minutes. I won't talk about it too much then, but this is basically... One of the things I liked about this part is we're actually seeing Deucalian is such a different alpha now in the past than he is in the present, now that he's the alpha of the alpha pack. And with that, I remember just thinking when I was watching this for the first time, man, he really changed. What did that? Little did I know we were getting ready to figure out what had happened. Now, on to point number 9, and we're at the school. Paige is alone in the darkened hallway. She has a note in her hand which seems to be a request from Derek to meet him at the school. Instead of Derek, Enis shows up and begins to chase her. Derek sits alone in the locker room bouncing a basketball and listens to Paige whimper and cry. Cora is surprised that young Derek would have asked Enis to turn Paige. Peter says he was the perfect choice since Enis had just lost a pack member, and by doing Derek a favor, Enis could gain a place in Talia's good graces. Stiles says Derek doesn't remember it was Enis, and Peter says that if he does remember, he hasn't said so. Young Peter was also at the school that night listening to Enis attack Paige. Derek reaches the point that he can't stand to listen to Paige's suffering anymore and rushes to help her. He finds her crawling along the floor and goes after Enis to stop him. Enis easily tosses the youngster away to the ground and holds him on the floor. Derek sees that Paige is already bitten and stops fighting. Now, just to throw in a quick thought here, this was tough to watch, especially when you know Derek didn't really want this. It was all Peter's idea, and Enis is, of all the werewolves in the Alpha Pack, Enis was the one that is sort of your stereotypical werewolf that is sort of looks big and bad, but you never know about him. And one of the things that happened in here that Peter says is that Enis would have gotten into Talia's good graces. I disagree with Peter on that. I don't think Talia would have been very happy with Enis at all. The fact that he ended up being responsible for a human's death in Beacon Hills, the fact that it was someone her son loved, it was the fact that possibly Derek and Peter had something to do with it. I don't think turning Paige into a werewolf would have gotten Enis into her good graces. I think it could have gotten him in her doghouse for a while. Now, moving on to point 10, and this is sort of another short one, I guess, but Gerard is going to relate how Deaton arranged the meeting with Deucalian. Gerard says he wasn't surprised and quotes an English poet. I'm not going to go into that quote, but Scott questions how Gerard knew Deucalian was actually trying to make peace, and Gerard says, because I'm not an idiot. He then relates the scorpion and frog story, and of course, he talks about it being a Sanskrit fable. In this Sanskrit fable, it was a scorpion and a turtle, and everything turned out the same, and actually, Scott reveals that he knew basically what this fable was, which I was very impressed with Scott there. Gerard says he knows the werewolf's nature, and he knew that Deucalian's offer of a peace meeting was a trap. We know this is a lie. Gerard was waiting with several hunters when Deucalian arrived at the abandoned distillery with 3 members of his pack. Gerard says the meeting place is fitting because distillation is the separating of 2 substances by pushing them into their individual volatile states. Picking up on this, Deucalian says volatile is a state he is hoping to avoid. Gerard then cranks open a valve, releasing a white gas into the room from several sources. Both the werewolves and humans go down from the effects of the gas. Gerard jabs himself with what appears to be an auto-injector syringe. It's not clear what's in the syringe, but it makes him immune to whatever is affecting the others. Now, when relating the tale to Allison and Scott, Gerard lies and claims Deucalian ambushed him. What really happened after the release of the gas was that Gerard took out a homemade spiked mace. He uses it to beat down Deucalian's men, and Deucalian is shocked not only by the attack, but the fact that Gerard would kill his own men too. Gerard says the hunters with him also believed in peace with werewolves and therefore had to go. He says their deaths will be blamed on Deucalian. Peter is finishing up the tale of Derek and Paige, and he says the bite. Now with that, I'm going to end this point, but with this, the big thing here was figuring out that Gerard was lying just as bad as Peter was for the most part. And I'm going to be honest with everybody. The first time I saw this episode, it never occurred to me that some of those people in that group were also hunters, and that Gerard was sort of exterminating some of the hunters that liked werewolves. And that's not something that, for some reason, I missed that the first time I ever watched this episode. It's not until several episodes later that I realized some of those people were actually hunters as well. And I caught a couple of the things Gerard said. I was actually watching it with the subtitles on, and that's what made me catch that it wasn't all werewolves there. And just the fact that whatever that white gas was, I don't think it's ever been revealed. I thought it was some type of pressurized wolf's bane or something like that, but it had some effect on humans as well. So that's why he took that, basically it looked like, I guess, the antidote. And so with this, of course, we see all this was Gerard's lie, and basically Gerard's a complete and total ass, and he doesn't believe in the code like Chris does, and we can see where this could be a problem in the future. Now, on to point 11, and this can be a little bit of a big one, but with point 11 here, Peter is finishing up the tale of Derek and Paige. He says that the bite didn't take with Paige. He thought it should have. She was young, she was strong, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. And we're also going to see that Stiles remembers when Peter offered to turn him in season 1, that he said that he would be a werewolf if it didn't kill him. And so basically Stiles is realizing that this does potentially come with a price. Now we're going to get to see Paige, who's in pain, and she's slowly dying as Peter is skulking in the shadows. Derek held her at the base of the Druid tree in the basement of the abandoned house or cellar. And as that's going on, point 11 is going to basically go back and forth between Paige dying and Deucalian. And so Deucalian's crawling out of the distillery and rolls over in the dirt as Gerard follows him out. Deucalian begs begs Gerard not to harm him further, saying that he had a vision of peace. Gerard mocks him, saying that his vision was short-sighted. He then produces 2 of the hunter's flashbang arrows and thrusts them deep into Deucalian's eyes. They explode. Sparks of smoke pour from his damaged eye sockets. Back to Derek and Paige. Derek is taking away as much of Paige's pain as he can. She is still suffering, though. She explains that she knew he was different. She suspected he was a werewolf because she had seen strange things in the town, and also because of the way he spoke when he would say things like he caught a scent. She knows she's going to die, and she asks him to end it, and he does by gently breaking her neck. Peter explains that he took Paige's body to the woods where she would be found, and her death attributed to another in a long line of Beacon Hill's animal attacks. He then tells Stiles that killing an innocent takes a piece of a werewolf's soul, making it a bit darker. This shows up in the eyes turning from a golden yellow to a cold blue, and we get to see Peter flash his cold blue eyes. Now, just a couple things on this section. Just the idea that all this was Peter's fault and Derek ended up having to be the one to finish Paige off because of what was going on. It does make you wonder whether or not if they would have gotten some help from Talia. Could they have prevented this? If you could have gotten Deaton to help, could they have prevented her death? It's something that I sort of thought about from the very beginning, but it throws a good question out there. The other big thing here is this idea of basically the way Gerard took Deucalian's eyesight, and I'm not exactly sure. They never really explained why he wasn't able to kill Deucalian. It seemed more to start with like he wasn't really trying to kill him, that he was just trying to like maim him, which he did a very good job of. But with that, this idea that Deucalian had a vision of peace, and basically this conflict with Gerard and the hunters basically was going to turn Deucalian into this man of peace, into the alpha of the alpha packs. Now, we're almost done here. I think we've got 2 more points here. Point number 12. We're off to Deaton's veterinary clinic. Deucalian's there with his eyes injured. He is with Deaton, Talia, and his beta Marco. And with that, they're in a situation where basically Deaton's going to tell him that the tissue will grow back, but the sight's not going to return. Deucalian lets out a fierce roar of rage and wants to be left alone. Well, Deaton and Talia leave, but Marco doesn't. Marco is going to decide to take his chance, and he attacks Deucalian, but Deucalian can partially transform and realizes he can see Marco, and he's going to viciously kill Marco on the examination table. We're going to move back to Gerard, who's going to finish telling Scott the story that Deucalian can see as a wolf. Allison wonders aloud if they can take advantage of that, and before they leave, Gerard asks Scott to take some of his pain. Scott is going to oblige, but when Gerard starts talking about if they could have done things different, why he always had to take things, why he just couldn't ask, Scott's going to call BS on him and basically tell him that he thinks he's lying. His heartbeat never changed any, and of course Gerard says it's because he's telling the truth, and Scott says it's because he might be a good liar. And then he tells Gerard that if anything he does or has told Scott gets any of his friends hurt, he's going to return, and he's going to take away more than his pain. Now, we're also going to get back to Cora, Stiles, and Peter. Stiles is sort of giving them a look. Cora's going to question this, and he acts ignorant as to what she's referring to, and then, of course, this makes her want to punch him, and he says that she's definitely Derek's sister. But then he explains that he doesn't believe anything that Peter says, and that they had read in Jennifer and Miss. He explains that they are reading Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness in school, and that the book's narrator, Charles Marlowe, is unreliable and is telling it from his perspective, which may or may not be what exactly happened. Stiles said they didn't get the whole story from Peter, and when Cora asks if he plans to ask Derek about the girl he loved but had to kill, Stiles says if he has to. Now, with that, couple couple big things here. We basically get to see the point when Deucalian basically figures out he can take other members of his pack's power, and this would have been probably the start of the Alpha Packs, or at least the time period around when he started realizing that, hey, he could take all of his betas' powers, other alphas could do that too, and who knows what all they are going to be able, or how powerful they could become. Who knows how powerful they could become when they do that. Also with that, I really love the fact that we're going to get shown that both Scott and Stiles weren't falling for what Peter and Gerard were saying. And they both were suspicious. They both didn't believe them. And they both knew they needed to get to the truth. Now, on to part 13. This is the end, and this is just one of those things where this is very short, but basically this is our scene where, of course, Paige has already been removed by Peter from the basement, the cellar of the house where the Nemeton is, and young Derek is still covered in her blood and the black goo that was seeping out as she rejected the bite. Talia Hale's going to come into the abandoned basement, and she calls his name, and he confesses. She says she knows. He then explains that his eyes are different. She says they are different, but still beautiful, just like the rest of you. Moving on, flash to the present. Derek returns to that abandoned distillery as an adult. As he returns to the distillery, you can tell as he's watching or as he's looking at the vendetta sign that he's remembering what happened to Paige and what happened with Enis and why that was cut in the wall so many years ago, and just basically you could see his younger life sort of coming back to him. And then the episode ends, and I don't have a lot to say about that part. I just love the emotional moment between Talia and Derek. I just wish they would have let them get together earlier or talk about this in a little more in depth so we could learn a little more about their relationship. Of course, we do know because of statements that Peter is going to make when they are actually looking for the Nemeton. We do know that Talia took the memory of the Nemeton from both Peter and Derek, so it's not something she wanted them dealing with anymore. All right, everybody, this has probably been a very long recap and review, and I do apologize for that, but there's just so much in this episode, and I love this episode so much that there was just a lot of things I wanted to talk about, a lot of things I wanted to recap. This is such a good episode. I would definitely suggest you go back and take a watch before the Teen Wolf movie. And with that, we do have 2 more episodes on our countdown. So we're going to have number 2 and number 1. And I will tell you, the number 2 episode is from season 3, and the number 1 episode is from season 1. That's all I'm going to tell you, though. But with that, these top 3, these are the 3 Teen Wolf episodes that basically I watch the most. If I sit down to watch Teen Wolf, I watch these 3, and then it'll be some others. And so that's why I have these in the top 3. I know a lot of people don't think Visionary is quite as high as I do, but I really love this. And I just want to point out, I love the acting of Ian Nelson, and I'm so glad that they brought him back in another episode later in the series. And so with that, I would have loved to have seen a young Derek Teen Wolf series. I thought that would have been awesome. But basically with that, this is why Visionary is my number 3 Teen Wolf episode. Nothing wrong with it at all. There were some questions, but the questions weren't things that I really took away from it. And it may have just been little things here and there that were cut out or that I still just miss when I watch it. So with that, guys, we are 16 days away from Teen Wolf the movie, and I cannot wait. So with that, thanks for listening. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below, and I'll see you next time on the Fandom Realm.